Welcome to this CodeRage 10 session, What's New in FireMonkey. And with me here in the studio is Darren Kosinski, FireMonkey R&D. Darren?
Hello, everyone.
And I'm David I, sort of helping out and cheering on Darren and the whole FireMonkey team that works on giving you these great enhancements in each release of the product. Darren has been doing this session for multiple code rages now in the past. What's new in FireMonkey? What's new in FireMonkey? So, if you have questions, you've been using FireMonkey, put those into the Q&A log. We'll get to those at the end for sure. Some of the things that we want to cover this time are some of the work that's been done to enhance FireMonkey for the Windows desktop platform, especially now that Windows 10 is out, adding functionality for both iOS and Android and even OS 10. Some enhancements that we need to make, for example, I'm sure because of changes in things that Apple has been doing, Google has been doing with Android and so on, and just adding functionality. So given this whole list, Darren, is there something you just want to, at a top level before we drill down, talk about some of the things behind the work that you and the team have been doing and what was actually done and how it helps developers?
Yeah, there's a few things that really kind of stand out. Since the last CodeRage, we've had the two releases. We had XE8 and Rad Studio 10 Seattle. In each of those, we had quite a few changes to the framework, all to support more cross-platform development and multi-platform development. Probably two of the most significant ones that maybe don't get a whole lot of attention. You see these items that say Z Order Manager. The one for iOS was introduced in XE8, and the one for Windows was introduced in Rad Studio 10 Seattle. This is a pretty important piece that enables the ability to mix our platform controls with FireMonkey-styled controls. As we started to introduce platform controls on iOS, this started to become more and more of an issue for customers. They wanted to do things like put buttons or labels along with web browsers or media players, and then we introduced the platform versions of edit and memo controls. The ability to mix these became more and more important. There's a lot of work involved in taking a FireMonkey control and making it into a platform-capable control. We really have to take the control apart and re-architect it using a model presenter type of architecture. We've been able to do a few controls over the past few releases, but it does take a lot of time to do that. What we wanted to do is find a way that we could get some of the most common controls done, or at least be usable more quickly. And that's what this Z Order Manager does. It's not something that a developer really uses themselves directly. The components and the forums use them behind the scenes to be able to layer the controls properly. On iOS, it lets controls be rendered into multiple UI views. On Windows, controls would have an individual window handle so that we can arrange them correctly. That's an interesting piece of technology that should really help people use the platform controls better, mix those along with FireMonkey-style controls.
And then when you list some of the controls that we provide an option, and we'll look at that in the ID and the object inspector in a moment, where you can say I want the platform control versus I want a styled control, right, for the control style or control type.
Right.
There's certain that we support, right? If I go into the list, there's certain controls on each platform that you've chosen to start with. Of course, there's many other user interface controls, right?
We have the edit and the memo and the list view have a full platform version, and those are for iOS. Edit and memo are available for Windows. There's others that also have that field. For example, the button and the label. Those are controls where we've made use of the Z Order Manager, where you can select for example, a platform version of a button, and what's actually rendered is a FireMonkey-styled button. FireMonkey handles all the control, but it does it in a way using the Z Order Manager that it can work along with native controls.
Let me just bring up, and I'll say, for example, we're doing this session for both the Delphi track and the C++ builder track, or Pascal and C++, but I'll just choose one because we're really thinking more in terms of the user interface here and the designer as opposed to code that you would write behind, right?
Right, yeah. This is a design time selection that you make.
So here I might, for example, put an edit box down, and we'll just stick that up somewhere, and we'll go and look at control type down here in the object inspector, and there's the two choices, right?
Right. The default is styled, and that's the typical FireMonkey styled control. The default style is our style that emulates the platform. That gives you the maximum cross-platform flexibility. When you run this control on Windows, it'll look like Windows control. When you run it on iOS or Mac, it looks like the appropriate control. On Android, similar. So the FireMonkey styled control is the typical FireMonkey control that we've always had. The platform control will render this edit. On iOS, it'll be a native UI text control. And you see when you choose platform, the control adds a little icon to it in the designer. And that's your indication that this will be rendered as a platform control. Now, when you select a platform control, you can still run this on platforms like Android or Mac OS where we don't have the platform implementation. And what FireMonkey does is it will use the styled presentation on those platforms.
So if I hit run right now to run this on Windows, will this be, I guess, since we support edit styled now on Windows 10 or in 10 Seattle,
right?
It'll be a native control.
This
right?
would be a native control,
Okay.
right? If you were to run this on Android or on Mac, then it would actually show a styled control here.
Okay. Now I can mix, right? If I add another control, what would be an example? Maybe a tab control or a panel or something that's not platform styled. Is that the right choice when I want to start thinking about Z order and mixing these?
Sure, you can do things. You can use tab controls. You can use things like our multi-view control.
So if I put a multi-view, for example, and here's the little navigation pane, right, of the multi-view?
Right, yeah.
And that does that have a control type?
It does, yes. What the multi-view does is it's not actually there's not a corresponding native control. But what the multi-view is providing you there is a panel. And the panel is one of the controls that we've made use of this new Z order feature.
Okay.
So that the panel can host platform controls. It will do the right thing if you have, for example, if you were to have a web browser or a map or media player on the surface of your form, the multi-view will do the right thing. When it slides out, it will slide out on top.
Okay.
Or it will push over to the side. It will do the right thing by using this Z order manager.
Okay. So here I've got a multi-view, and in the navigation pane, I've set multi-view to be, the mode's going to be platform behavior. That's fine. You've got your choice of popover, drawer, and so on. But I want it to behave the right way on iOS, for example. If I'm on a phone or a tablet, it'll do the right thing with the multi-view, right?
Right, yeah.
So now this one I've set control type. Does it really matter what I set for this panel?
Well, it does. For any panel, you need to make sure that the controls are all the same type.
Okay.
So if you set on the multi-view, if you set it to be a platform control type, then all of the controls that you put in that panel, you want those to be platform controls.
What happens if I don't?
You won't see them.
So if I just run, let's compile and run this one. Then here's my edit box, which is fine, right?
Right, yep.
And again, if I ran this on iOS and whatever, but your guidance is there's nothing that forces me to have them all platform or styled.
No, there's not. But when you choose a panel or a container that you want to be a platform control, then that container or that panel needs to have all platform controls in it.
Okay. So if I use the view, does that give me any indication that something might be wrong?
Well, no, because FireMonkey will always do what it can to show the controls. The behavior of the multi-view, the mode.
Yeah, the mode.
Instead of platform behavior, change it to like panel.
Okay.
Yeah, the problem is since you don't have in the designer, you don't have a master button for it. You typically want to use the panel for being able to do what you need to do your design.
This control type style multi-view is platform, but at design time, I'll still see it, right?
Design time, you'll still see it.
Okay, so I just want to show people, okay, so I've got edit box, styled, platform on this one. So I guess my edit won't show up. Is that what should happen?
It will show up, but it will show up as a styled control.
Oh, okay. And then I know there was other work that came along the way. For example, we introduced app analytics, and so making sure that there was a FireMonkey support for app analytics for things like form show, controls getting focused, and so on, right?
Right, exactly. The original app analytics used some very Windows-specific APIs, and so that wouldn't work in a cross-platform environment. So we had to bake in the mechanisms for actually capturing analytics data into the FireMonkey framework itself. And
again, that's done under the covers, right? The developer just goes and says, okay, I want to add app analytics. There's a FireMonkey application. It's got an app analytics component. I put a different application ID up there. Again, I can do app start, app exit, control focus, window activated, unhandled exceptions, and I can track custom exceptions if I have those. So let's start with the VCL application. Let's turn on app analytics, controls get focus, launch the form, close it, launch the form, close it. Let's raise an exception. You can also create your own privacy notice. There's a default one that we provide that you can use, but you can create a custom notice for your customers if they turn on app analytics that says it's completely anonymous. We're not tracking any kind of personal identifying information. And that's built into the app analytics component. Here you've got privacy message, so you just go into that property, and here you can provide your own custom privacy notice if you want to. Let's go over and activate FireMonkey version. Has a little bit more. Again, we've got control focus, and we can enable analytics and so on, raise and log exceptions. And it can track forms being loaded. So you can track how the users are navigating through your application, either through menu items, maybe actions, forms, multi-part forms that you might have in your application to see the navigation that's going on to understand what your users are doing. So let's go and run this on Win32. And then let's enable analytics, launch form 2, raise an exception, and then turn it off and come back. So under the covers, enable analytics is just setting analytics to true and then updating the user interface. We've got a form show going on here. Here's that raise exception. We have a pointer to a form, and so when we try to call form show, then it gets that exception. And then we'll go over to the multi-device project. And as I did before, I've got my app analytics key and so on. I've got the option set to include custom as a choice. And again, the button event handler is just going to pass the parameters to the track event method. We can choose different platforms. So for example, we can run this on Win32. There's the privacy notice that comes up, and we've got a couple events firing with different times. Same with 64-bit. We can use Android. So we'll target my Samsung Galaxy S4. There's the splash screen. There's the privacy notice. And you can customize that how you want. And we'll click the button and send a few custom events to the App Analytics server. I know there were a couple other things that we had to do specific for iOS 9, and there's a workaround where we had to go into the info P list because under the covers, I think web browser, anything that made an HTTP call under the covers, Apple had this new restriction where you had to tell the operating system that your application is okay to use HTTP versus HTTPS, right?
Right. Apple wants all communications out of the device to be encrypted. So they introduced this in iOS 9 where they just block any communications that is not encrypted unless the developer explicitly sets an exception. And there's two ways to set an exception. You can set a blanket exception so that all communications outside of your application will be unencrypted, and Apple will allow that. or you can set a specific exemption for a specific web address. And if you are doing something that includes a web browser, for example, you probably want to have a blanket exemption because you don't know necessarily what web address people are going to surf to. For something like App Analytics, where it talks to one server, you can add just a single exemption where you just allow unencrypted communications to one particular server. And this is true not just for App Analytics, but for any type of communication that an application does. Anything that uses HTTP, Apple wants it to all be encrypted to use HTTPS instead.
So if you use the Indy HTTP component, for example, and you just want to do regular HTTP.
Right.
So one of the things Darren helped me with when I updated my iPhone 6 to iOS 9, and I wanted to do the App Analytics part, which uses HTTP currently under the covers, was figuring out how to set up everything for Apple's new app transport security feature. And then I also said, well, web browser's another one. So Darren helped me. And I did a blog post, and we'll get that URL, but you can just search for, David I. from FireMonkey's transport security feature. But Darren showed me the two ways. And if you want to go through these option 1 and option 2.
Yeah, the option 1 that you have here, it basically disables the app transport security. So it allows any kind of unencrypted communication from your application outside of the device. So this requires adding a key to the info P list. It requires making a custom info P list. So it's a pretty simple thing to just add the text to it. Option 2 adds a specific exemption for a specific domain. And you see in this case, it's adding our App Analytics server to allow insecure HTTP. There's a couple things that people can get stuck on with making a custom info P list. It's something that we do need to probably in the future make a little bit easier for the current versions that we have. Making an info P list, the easiest way is to build and deploy your application to the device first. That'll let the IDE and the build system auto-create an info P list. Then you need to copy that outside of the build directory into another location. Good idea is to put it into the same directory where your project is located. And then you need to edit the file with a text editor. And one thing that's really important is the line endings have to be line feeds. They cannot be carriage return line feeds. So if you use something like text edit, that's going to mess the file up. But
I use the IDE code editor. That's the way I do it.
Yeah, or some other editor that will preserve the line endings. You add these keys, like it shows on this blog post. Add them to this text file, and then you need to set up the deployment in the IDE. Another thing to keep in mind is that the iOS file system is a case-sensitive file system. So when you set up the deployment, you need to make sure that the remote name is exactly info plist with a capital I and everything else lowercase.
And so here I have 2 projects loaded in the IDE, and under the project deployment, I have this info plist where it did exactly that. I built it for iOS 64, for example, and then I copied it into my project. That's why its local path is the same as the project.
Right.
I've got the info. This is the one that gets generated, and then I'm deploying that in the bundle with capital I for info.plist. So
right. One other thing to make a note of, when you add this custom info plist, you need to make sure you disable the default one as well.
Yeah, so the default one, which got generated I was doing a debug build to the debug subfolder under iOS device 64. I unchecked that one. Then I clicked the add button to add this new one after I copied it over and edited it. So let me open that one up. So here's the file there. Now, you're tempted to just double click and open it up with Notepad, right? That's that's the bad way. So as Darren told me, we go down to the bottom of the generated info plist, and here's the key where we've added the transport security, and this was App Analytics, so we said exception domain appanalytics.embarcadero.com, and then a key here, allow insecure HTTP loads, set that to true.
Right.
Instead of the default is false. And there's notes on my blog. I have a link to the tech note on Apple's developer site, which talks about the different options that you have for some of these settings.
Yes.
And the same thing on the web browser component. If I go to that sample, I just had a T web browser component and a button, and is to go and say add existing, and here my info P list. So if I go and open this one up, and this one for web browser, we go to the end. I just needed to say just allow arbitrary loads, and I set that to true.
Yes.
This key or that set of keys depending on the domains. So.
Right, yeah, and any app that does HTTP communications, you will either need to make sure that it is secure communications using HTTPS, or you need to add these exceptions.
I know there's some Android things. We're going to get to a little bit of it with some additional slides, and we'll switch back to demos and so on. As for FireMonkey Windows, people have been asking, what about hints?
Yes.
And so we have hints now, right? We can use hints on, I think it's on Windows 10, right? And I think we can do hints on OS 10 as well.
Yes, that's right. The two desktop platforms, both Windows and OS 10.
Okay. So for those that were asking me, what about hints, like we hover hints and so on, like we have in VCL, have that in FireMonkey for desktop platforms.
Right.
So here's an example. It's called the native controls demo, and we've got it targeting the different platforms, FireMonkey application. It's got tab controls that show up at the top or bottom depending on the platform you choose. It'll render the right styles or the platform style. So just look for the control type, and it either set to platform or style. So here, this T memo is set to platform style. For the standard controls, we have a T-switch control, for example, and that's going to also have a control type that we can either style it or have it be the native platform. So let's run this on 32 or 64-bit Windows and see what some of this looks like. So the switch is a Windows 10 switch. There we go. We've got our calendar look, edits, for example. Again, just as you got in previous versions, you get this little icon look when it's native platform versus if it's styled. We can go and look at what it would look like on Windows. So there's that T-switch component. Here's the memo and so on. So you can see that both at design time and then at runtime. And we got the multi-device preview happening as well. We've added control hints, and those work on both Windows and OS 10. Here's our form, and it's got some buttons, and those buttons have hint text, for example, down here. So if we hover over the buttons, we'll get the hint. We can also display in the label this example. When it gets the hint, it'll display and put it in the label. We can also have shortcuts showing up in the hint if we have a checkbox turned on. We'll see that in action. And we have menus, and we can have hints on menus as well. So if we bring up the menu items, we can set hints for different menu items. So for example, on menu 5, it's got a menu 5 hint. Let's take a look at this first on Windows. We'll compile and run, and here we hover over it. There's the hover hint, and notice we've got the hint showing up on the label. There's the buy button, and then here's the hello hover hint. And then if we have form show, then we'll get the hint for the parent. If we turn on this checkbox, then the parent is the form. For menus, we can have the hints show up. There they are, 5 and 6. Here's an example of a shortcut that goes along with an action. So the Control A, we could turn off that, and then we just get the hover hint. Let's run this on OS 10. So we've got our application. Let's hover over. There we go. There's the hint. Parent show hint is not turned on. So let's turn on form show hint. There it is. Here's the hint value menus. So there's the menu 3, menu 4 hint. And those are the mouse hover hints working on Windows and OS 10. Native rendering, but it talks about when we use platform native versus using the GPU-driven control rendering? Right,
yes. When you use the FireMonkey rendering, FireMonkey will let you do things like custom styles. So especially if you don't want to use the standard default style, the platform style that we use, if you want to use one of our premium styles, or a custom style that you've made yourself, that's when you want to use the standard styled control. When you want all of the rendering features of the native platform, that's when you would use the platform control. And that's especially relevant on iOS, where you have some features, like some text input features that you get.
Like word substitution or word completion or replacement, right, for example?
Right.
Yep. Because we did have, cut, copy, paste, those kinds of things.
Cut,
right?
copy, paste is there.
Yep.
We have the magnifier loop. That works with both the styled and the platform control.
Drag and drop was new and added in the latest release for 10 Seattle, right, with FireMonkey?
We've had drag and drop, but we made some big improvements to it. One of the you can always drag and drop within your application. That capability existed, but particularly on the Mac, what wasn't supported is being able to drag and drop outside of the application. And so we enhanced the drag and drop feature to add that capability.
I'm always looking for these new services. We've talked about this in past code rages for FireMonkey and how parts of FireMonkey functionality, how it looks on the different platforms, is it looks to see if there's a service available. Is that correct?
Right, exactly.
So if there's a dialogue service or a menu service, because phones don't have menus or menu services, they don't have mouse, so there's no mouse service.
Right.
Those kinds of things. So here, IFMX drag drop service is one of those new services, for example.
Yes. Yeah, that's what the service is intended for. It allows a component developer or an application developer to easily check to see if a service is available on the platform, and then they can use it.
So let's take a look at drag and drop in action on Windows and OS X. So here's a simple example. It's got an edit box, and we've got two radio buttons where we can take the input from the edit box and have it show up down here in this text control. And we can also use that and to get the bitmap image of what appears down there in the application. We look at the code behind. It says, is the text edit not empty? And does the platform service support IFMX drag and drop? And if that's true, then we get the service as a return. If we do a mouse down on the control and drag it, then we'll get the drag data to either be the text, if we have the text radio button, or an image if we have the radio button for dragging the bitmap. And then it will begin the drag, and then the drop is handled inside of the runtime library. And then we free the drag image. So let's run this on Windows first. I'll bring up Microsoft Word, and we'll put some text in here. And then drag as text, we'll drag that over, and there's the hello world. And then drag as image, we'll drag that over, and now we have an image inside of Microsoft Word, or whatever the target application might be. We'll go back and run this on OS X. So here's our application, and I'm using the Notes application that comes with OS X. So we'll put in hello world and have drag as text, and we'll drag that over, and now we have the hello world text in our new note. And we'll also drag as an image, and now we have an image in our notepad as well. So there's also C++ examples for the new capabilities in FireMonkey, including the drag and drop. Here it is, same exact form. And then here we check to see if there's a platform service again, using the language extension to make sure we can search for the interface, that there is a drag and drop surface. And then we get that service, and then we can just use the same kind of logic to get the text or get the image and begin the drag drop to whatever application we want. So we'll just run this one on Windows just to show that it works the same way in both Object Pascal and C++. We'll drag this text over, and we'll drag as image. There's the same application working in both Object Pascal and C++.
let's look at the enhancements to the FireMonkey Style Designer. The FireMonkey Style Designer is integrated into the IDE. So one of the enhancements is with the stylebook component. So the stylebook component now supports a collection of styles for various platforms. So for example, for the one stylebook component, I can have individual styles for, let's say, Windows 10 desktop, Mac OS 10 Yosemite, Mac OS 10 Lion, iOS. I can have a specific style for my Windows 8 desktop, for Windows 7 desktop, Android, or Android Lite. And I could add additional platforms and styles as needed. And it's as easy as double-clicking on the stylebook component and adding additional platforms and loading the style for that platform. Another enhancement is you have easier styling for individual controls. So if you have a specific component like a button that you want to change the color or apply a different background graphical pattern, this is now easy to do. And you can customize the included platform styles using your own bitmaps, custom fonts, and color schemes using the integrated FireMonkey Style Designer. So for example, to my button on the Windows platform, I was able to easily add a multi-resolution bitmap image and align it to the left of the button, and also easily add this nice blue custom background graphic. And on the Mac OS X platform, I'm also able to easily do the same, but in this case I chose to align the image to the right of the button. And it's easy to do this just by selecting your control, right-clicking, and saying Edit Custom Style. This brings up the FireMonkey Style Designer. And here's where you can make your customizations to the colors, the design patterns, etc. And you end up with a new customized style button component. To add the image to the button, first I selected the button, and then from the Button 1 Style T Layout from the tool palette, I dropped a T-image component onto the button, and then for the T-image component, I aligned it to the left. I made some changes to the margins, and then for the actual image itself, we used the T-image multi-res bitmap property, and we load in the image that we wanted to use. It's that simple. And to change the graphics for the background of the button, first in the structure pane, we select background. And in the Object Inspector, there's a property called Normal Link. When we select it, it brings up the Bitmaps Link Editor. So here is where you can change the graphics for the different states. So for example, Normal Link, or when you control focus using Focus Link, or when you mouse over a control, like Hot Link, and you also have Press Link. Then you would click on the Image Plus to add your new graphics. I'm using this graphic called Blue Button. And then you can change and use your custom graphics. You would position the grid lines for the new graphics and apply it to your control, in this case my button. So now our Custom 1 button has our new background graphics with this nice image, and you can see it at design time. So that's great.
And we've talked a little about Android, but I wanted to make sure that we go and review and think again about things that were done for FireMonkey and Android. And one of the things was people like this new sort of touch animation. If you touch on a button, it kind of does this nice press animation kind of thing. Can you talk a little about what's going on there?
Yeah, that's part of the new Google Material Design that they introduced with Android 5, the Lollipop release. It adds a kind of common style across all the Android controls. The first implementation that we've done of this is the touch animation. When you press on something or touch something, you'll see the touch animation. If you put a button press and you keep your finger on it, you'll see the animation will grow eventually to fill up the entire control. So it has a very native look and feel to it.
So here I have a simple one button form application. I'll enable Android. I've got my Samsung Galaxy S4, which is running Android 5 Lollipop. So here we have our button running. And again, I don't know with GoToWebinar whether it's going to show up or not because everybody's doing screen grabbing and so on. But if I tap the button, that's one thing. And you kind of see an effect as it grows out. But You're seeing if I hold it, oh, that was nice. Yeah. If I hold on the button, you'll see it.
Yeah, you can see it here. When you see it on the actual device, it looks a lot more native.
All right, is there anything else in the world of Android?
There is some new stuff for Android, too. We did a lot of work both in XE8 and in Rad Studio 10 Seattle to improve the way that FireMonkey apps work with the threading environment of Android. Unlike Windows or Mac or iOS, where the applications run basically in a single thread, on Android there's actually two threads that are running. There's a thread that's running in the Java environment, and that spawns a thread that runs in the native environment, and then there's JNI calls that go back and forth between those threads, and they synchronize. That can be a delicate dance at times, particularly during application startup, and when applications are shut down and relaunched, or they go in the background and relaunched, especially true if it's something that happens quickly. So if you, for example, hit the home button and then realize you didn't want to close, you try and go back to the application very quickly, the threading model can get very complicated at that stage. And so we've done a lot of work to improve the stability and reliability. And in particular, in Rad Studio 10 Seattle, there's probably the biggest jump that we've made in the stability of that kind of operation. Also on Android, we made some improvements and enhancements to being able to both send and receive intents. And there's a sample that we ship, one that shows sending intents and one shows receiving intents.
So we're in the IDE, and I've loaded up a Delphi project group so that we can show you the sample for Android intents. Darren, tell us about this project group.
Yeah, this is a project that shows how to both send and receive an intent in an Android application. The whole idea of an intent, you can sort of think of it as being somewhat similar to like shell execute on Windows. It's what lets you do inter-process communications. So an application, when it launches with an intent, which is what the application is supposed to do. This is how you can do something like click on a link on a web page and it opens up an application, and it can open up a document. It can do things like that. That's what the intent system of Android is designed to do. So the ability to send an intent is something that has been part of FireMonkey for a long time. And the ability to receive an intent, we've been able to do that in response to a push notification. So you could get a notification pushed to your Android device. You tap on the notification, and it can launch a FireMonkey application. So we've expanded that so that it doesn't have to be in response to a push notification. An intent can be launched from another FireMonkey application or any other type of Android application, and it can launch a FireMonkey application to do something with that. So what this sample does is there's two projects in it. One for receiving an intent and one for sending an intent. And what it does is it just sends some text from one application to another. And there's two buttons that are defined here. One sends a little snippet of a Hello World program. The other sends a little snippet of what a Unit 1 would look like. And if you look down in this unit, send text via intent, you see there's a line that says intent.setType, and it defines a type text/pass. That's telling the Android system you want to send this text to an application that can handle this type. I just made this type up because it's something that is unlikely to exist on an Android device. You can send different types of content. It doesn't have to be text. Text is an easy way to deal with it. What this code is doing is it's creating an intent, and it sets the type of the intent, sets the action of the intent, which here the action is to view it, and then it sets a property called extra text, which has the text that we want to send, and then it calls the Android package manager to find if there's something that supports this intent type, and then it will start that activity. And if it doesn't, it'll show a message that says that it can't find anything to handle this.
Okay, and then the other unit is the receiver?
Right, this is the receiver. This one is probably a little bit simpler in that it just receives the text, and the application just has a memo, and it will put the text in the memo.
So here in the form create, it looks like I'm registering.
You're setting up an event that will get fired when the application starts up that says that if the application is being started with an intent, then retrieve the content of that intent and handle it. And the function near the bottom of the screen here, so yeah, the method at the bottom, handle intent action, this is where it actually receives the intent from the Android package manager, and you see it just extracts the text string from the intent and adds it to the memo. There's one thing you have to do in the receiver, and that's that you have to modify the Android manifest template. Okay, so near the bottom you see a section of XML called intent filter, and that section already exists in the default manifest file. The first two items, the action and the category, those are the default main action that's used by the Android launcher. So those already exist. The action below that and the categories, this is what is added. So this indicates that this application can handle an intent with the action of view. It can be a default handler for this particular type, and it can be browsable. And then it sets the MIME type that this can support. Here it's the text/pass, which is the same that was defined in the code.
Okay, so now we've run, which installed that receiver on our device.
Right.
So now the send intent application is loaded. That's the splash screen. So here I just click the first button.
Just click one of the buttons.
And it says open with.
And you see it has receive intent, so you can tap that.
Just once or always, or just tap it? Okay.
You can do just once.
And now it's started the receiver, and there's the text.
Right. And that's the text that came through the intent.
With that, Darren, thank you so much for walking us through what's new in FireMonkey for this CodeRage 10. And now it's time for your questions. For this CodeRage 10, and now it's time for your questions.
Okay, great. Thanks, Darren, for that session, and thanks for joining us for Q&A.
Sure.
So the new FireMonkey hints we were showing there, those work in only in Windows 10, or they work in all versions of Windows, or?
No, they should work in all versions of Windows.
Okay, great. And they work on OS 10 as well, right?
Right.
Now, is that a new feature on OS 10, or is OS 10, will that work on most versions of OS 10 as well?
That should work on most versions.
I know most people that run OS 10 usually are on the most recent version, so it's not usually as big of a deal to support older versions. But
right.
So does this work on Android 6 Marshmallow?
Yes, we did. We did testing with the betas of the Android Marshmallow release, and it seemed to work okay. And now that Android 6 is actually released, we've done some tests, and also seems to work okay.
So there's a question here about why your tool palette was in rainbow colored at some point.
That was some settings that I think David I had on his
that was on
his
David
machine.
Okay. Yeah, so it's just under settings in the IDE.
Right.
Change that. Yeah, I saw that. I looked at it and see the rainbow, but I was like, oh, maybe I missed something.
Yeah, I don't think that's the default. That's the default, but you can set it if you want that.
So there's a question here about being able to show buttons in a down state as opposed to always being in an up state. Is that something that we support? So now we have like a switch that has like a on or off state.
Right.
But we have buttons that have because like the speed button, you could do a down state on VCL, right?
Right. Yeah. The speed buttons. There haven't been any changes in this regard in Rad Studio 10 Seattle. So the behavior of things like the speed button should be the same as what we had previously.
For the sending and receiving intents, can you send photos and videos that way as well? Yeah,
you should be able to send arbitrary content. I think it's generally not advised to send a large amount of data through that mechanism, but in theory, you should be able to.
But you could, on Android, you could save the photo to like a shared directory and send like a absolute path to it or something like that, right?
Right. Yeah, that's typically how you would do it. You would send a URL to it.
Okay. Is SVG supported for buttons for like icons and backgrounds and such?
For things like backgrounds, no. With the styles are all centered around bitmaps, so you'd want to use bitmap graphics for that, and that's what the multi-resolution bitmaps are for, so that you can have the bitmaps for the appropriate size.
Does list view custom elements work differently now?
Yes, there have been quite a few changes to list view. It supports. It's a bit easier to design the custom elements. It still does not have the same flexibility as Listbox. Listbox is kind of the ultimate component as far as being able to configure it. But the cost of that configurability is performance. So if you have a large number of items, the list view is the control that you would typically want to use. And in Rad Studio 10 Seattle, we've made it easier to customize the layout of it.
So there's a question right here about using the T-path on iOS to render SVGs. Any tips on how to get the best performance out of that?
No tips in particular. You should be able to use T-path to do some rendering. There has been some work done to improve T-path. I know that there's it is an area of interest for us for further development and optimization. So it's something that future releases will probably see more and more attention on.
Okay. And do you know if there's any apps in the Google Play Store or the App Store that show off FireMonkey really well?
Yeah, I'm sure there are.
I know that like the Digifort app, which you have to have, unfortunately, connected to the Digiport server to work, does a really good job. It has a lot of great animations and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's a fantastic app, and I believe that's for both Android and iOS. And I'm not sure if we have like a kind of a best of FireMonkey in the app stores somewhere on our website or not, but that would be a great thing to put together, because I know we have a lot of apps that have been made with FireMonkey that are deployed to both the iOS App Store and the Google Play Store.
Yeah, there's a lot of them out there. I'm just trying to think if there's one that we like really show off really well. Let's see here. So here's a question, and this was probably going to be a hard one to answer. What's some ways you could compare Xamarin to FireMonkey as far as what are some advantages FireMonkey has?
Well, one of the big differences with Xamarin is that you're calling the native API. So you can use Xamarin lets you use the same language that lets you use C# to target multiple devices. Like iOS does not natively support C#, Android doesn't natively support C#, and so Xamarin gives you the capability to write C# code, to write an iOS app or an Android app for using C# code. But it doesn't give you the ability to write one set of code that runs across all of these devices. So that's the one of the big advantages of FireMonkey is that you write one application, and through things like the multi-device designer, you can make custom layouts for different devices. But the code that you write, by writing against the FireMonkey framework, you write one set of code and it runs on all of these devices. It'll run on Windows platform, OS 10 desktop platform, iOS and Android with the same piece of code. So what we've done with FireMonkey is we've abstracted the framework APIs so that you write to the FireMonkey API, and the FireMonkey API under the covers calls the appropriate native APIs for the system that it's running on.
Yeah, Xamarin doesn't abstract it. They do a little bit of abstraction, but when I've seen it, it's not a complete abstraction like FireMonkey allows for. The other thing I've noticed is with Xamarin, you're writing a lot lower level, which you can do that with FireMonkey. You can access all those APIs if you want to, but the nice thing is you don't have to access all those APIs all the time.
Right. Yeah. The Delphi runtime, we have Delphi translations of the Apple Cocoa APIs and the Google Android APIs. So if you want to write to the low level APIs, it's possible to do that.
And the other thing is, if you go look at the Xamarin documentation on connecting to a database, it's like a few pages of documentation to connect to a database, and then it's like, oh, and if you want to do it on Android, do this one, iOS, do this one, and I can be connected to a database and deployed with FireMonkey before you finish reading the documents on Xamarin.
Right, exactly.
So yeah, you get a lot of high productivity with FireMonkey. And there's pros and cons to both, but I definitely think FireMonkey is a much better solution. Outside of the IDE, can a UX designer design the appropriate application style, etc.? So can you farm out the style design to someone using another tool besides the IDE?
Yes, you can, and that's really kind of the way that that the FireMonkey styles are created in the first place. Is we have a graphic designer who designs the graphic elements, and we use the bitmap style designer for taking those bitmaps and importing them into a style that can then be used in FireMonkey.
So they just use Photoshop or something like that to design the graphical elements, and then you just import those into the designer? Right.
You import those. It's not a trivial task. I wouldn't say that it's really a task for the beginner, but it's something that that is possible to do, and it's something that it's essentially the workflow that we use when we create our custom styles.
So the import process is a matter of marking off, this is the button element, this is where it goes, and stuff like that? Is that
right? Yeah.
Okay. Is it possible to copy a SVG T-path render into a T-image on startup of the app on iOS to improve performance?
I'm not sure.
I think I saw somebody doing something about image or render caching or something like that. I want to say it was Simon Stewart, but I'm not positive if it was him or not, doing something about that. But so it may be possible. There's probably a way to do that. You could look into that and see. I think we're getting near the ends of the questions here. So the question here, after you create a project with FireMonkey, you can use it on any OS, for example, Windows, Android. What OSs can you run it on?
Yes, you can run it on Windows 32-bit and 64-bit, on Mac OS X, iOS, Android. So you just create your one project, and in the IDE, in the project manager, you have a list of targets, and you just activate the target that you want to deploy to, and then when you build it, it cross compiles for that platform, and then we'll try to deploy to that platform.
Okay. Do we have a guide on how to create custom styles? I think we have a session up not at CodeRage, don't we? Custom, how to skin apps with custom VCL styles. Yeah, it's coming up later today at noon. So in an hour. So yes, that's VCL styles specifically. I'm not sure if there's a FireMonkey styles one later. But and then I believe there's stuff in the doc wiki as well that covers that.
Yeah, I believe so. I believe there's some tutorials on styles.
Yeah, so take a look at the doc wiki and stay tuned for more sessions here at CodeRage. So there's a question here if there's a way to capture photos where the user doesn't have to confirm OK every time the picture is taken. Instead, photo is immediately available after pressing capture button. So is there a way that we can access the camera directly? Yeah, we can do that. Yeah. It's the T camera component that does that?
Yeah, the T camera component should be able to do that.
Actually, I did an app that I never finished. I should dig that up. But it was, I thought it'd be fun to have. And Samsung does this with theirs where it uses both cameras at the same time.
Right.
And so you could take a photo and take the photo on the front and the back immediately, one after the other.
Right.
And so then that way you could be in all your photos you take. I got the basics done sitting in the airport waiting for a flight, and then I just never finished all the other stuff I wanted to do with it. It was pretty easy to do. Okay, well, we're out of time here. Thank you so much, Darren, for this session and for all the work you do on FireMonkey.
Sure. Thank you.